Hey folks, welcome to the Mac and Mike show. I'm Mac and he's Mike, and we're going to talk today a little bit about a discussion that Mike had that was prompted by a Victor Davis Hanson short that he posted on the internet. And basically, what his short was about was the motivation behind the Allan Cole attempt on Donald Trump's life and his cabinet. And recently, if you paid attention to the news, Allan Cole, 31-year-old teacher from California, hopped on a train with a shotgun and a handgun and came across country to Washington, D.C., checked into the Hilton Hotel. I think it was a Hilton Hotel where the the White House correspondents' roast evening dinner was supposed to be held, and Donald Trump and several members of his cabinet were there. But we don't want to talk really about the attempt on Donald Trump's life. We've talked about a couple other attempts on Donald Trump's life, and while that's newsworthy and that's information, I think what I'd like to do and what I talked to Mike about doing is drilling down a little bit into freedom of speech and obviously a protected right by our Constitution. One of the First Amendment to the Constitution to guarantee the right to free speech for Americans. And compare it to what Allan Cole wrote to his relatives literally a few minutes before he went downstairs to try to kill the president. What he did, he wrote an email and he said he was motivated to do this because one, Donald Trump was a pedophile. Two, Donald Trump was a what's the second charge? They said he was a pedophile. He said he was a rapist. Second thing was he was a rapist. And third thing was he was a traitor. And none of those three things are true, but that is language that has been used very prominently across the internet, in media, both television and live streaming. And I think, Mike, the question that Victor Davis Hanson was hinting at, although he didn't get to it directly, was where do we draw the line for free speech? And that's really the challenge that you and I discussed. Do you have something to add at this point?
Not really, but I did do a comparison to libertarianism, which a lot of Republicans are sort of half libertarian. The question there is always where do you draw the line? Because if you can draw it in such a way that it's almost anarchist, because libertarians say least governed, best governed. But when you don't have enough government, you have anarchy. So you may as well be part of Antifa. And the other, it's trying to find the balance. So many things in life are really about finding the balance. And where do we draw the line? And it's always a matter of opinion. That's the problem. Another thing I have brought up, even if the Supreme Court makes a decision, the decisions are seldom unanimous. So even those who have the responsibility in our country for drawing some of these lines, they're split on their opinions, and it is just an opinion. So I don't know what the true answers are. I mean, that almost sounds like a conclusion to this episode, but I'm sure you have other things to discuss that will
Well,
frame it.
I guess, Mike, as you noted, when the Supreme Court makes their decision, they offer it to the public as an opinion. The Dred Scott case was an opinion, and then of course they changed it. And the Brown versus Board of Education was an opinion, and then they changed it. So,
Abortion.
yeah, there's so many things in which they've changed their opinions on. The Constitution hasn't changed, notably. But I think, Mike, the debate that America needs to have is where do we draw the line, right? Famously, the Supreme Court decided previously on the limits of free speech was you couldn't yell fire in a crowded theater, a crowded restaurant. What was it?
Yeah, crowded movie theater.
Yeah. So, and the reason for that is the issue of public safety. So I guess there is some limit to free speech when public safety is at risk. But what about, Mike and I talked about in a previous podcast, we talked about a group of Democrats who urged military members to be careful about following orders. Maybe those orders were not lawful orders, and they encouraged them to not follow unlawful orders. And we talked about that a little bit, about the scary part of that, and of course, recently, Donald Trump had a deadline for a ceasefire in the Iran war, and for some reason, everybody all over the country started picking up on the same, Taco Tuesday. Donald Trump does the Taco Two-Step and will not enforce his red lines or something, and I think there's other examples too of where the media and uh, the internet, whether that's an individual or whether that's a some sort of group that does streaming. There's a lot of those kind of services on the internet today. At what point does the opinion become an issue that weakens national security of the United States? For example, when the Democrats, those group of Democratic members of Congress, both the House and Senate, said, uh, be careful, don't follow unlawful orders. That put doubt in the minds of men who are men and women both, who are required to follow orders almost instantaneously and without question, so that bad things don't happen to larger groups of people. The same thing with the whole Taco Tuesday, Donald Trump does the two-step. Did that embolden the Iranians to feel that there was not support for the president in what he was doing, and therefore the Iranians walked away? Part of the reason why the Iranians walked away from the peace negotiations to end this war of attrition in Iran was it part of the fact that they thought, well, America's not behind their president? So did that weaken the president's team negotiating? Did it embolden our enemies? Those are questions everyone's going to answer for themselves. It's a rhetorical question. I'm not asking Mike to even answer it. What I'm saying is that if an individual or an organization does something, here's one that always got me. I was in Desert Storm, and if you remember, CNN was in Baghdad, and they were the only national news organization that was allowed to stay in Baghdad. Well, they broadcast Hussein's propaganda as news stories. After the war was over, they admitted, oh, yeah, we knew that was propaganda. We knew those were lies, but we felt it more important that, CNN was the only news organization in Baghdad. We thought if we didn't publish or we didn't broadcast that, they would have kicked us out too. We thought it was more important for us to be here. Well, that really is broadcast of the enemy's propaganda, really is bordering on traitor, being a traitor, isn't it? I mean, where is that line? And I'm not sure that I know where to draw it. Just like the Supreme Court said, okay, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Can you yell snake? Can you yell fire if all the lights are on? There's all kinds of gradients to that. And I think that while we certainly want to protect free speech in America, and that's a constitutionally protected. I don't want to ever violate our constitutionally protected rights. Is there a way that we can modify people's behavior so that we are not inciting people to do dangerous things? You know, this Cole guy, this teacher from California, wrote three things. Donald Trump is a pedophile, which is absolutely not true, as Victor Davis Hanson calls out. There is not one credible witness or one individual who can honestly say Donald Trump behaved as a pedophile. The second thing was they said he was a rapist. Well, we know that ABC News had to pay a rather large settlement to Donald Trump because one of their newscasters, George Stephanopoulos, called him a rapist, and it just simply wasn't true. So I don't know But yet, this man called out both those reasons for his reason wanting to kill Donald Trump. The third thing he said he was a traitor. And other than the people on The View and the people on CNN and the people on MSNBC and the people on all these, these very liberal streaming services, who else has called Donald Trump a traitor? And is there any evidence of that whatsoever? There may be opinions. People think, well, in my opinion, what he's doing is traitorous, but it doesn't really pass the traitor test, does it? What is it that he may have done that would qualify him as a traitor, Mike? Anything?
Well, it was the old Russia hoax, which didn't pan out to be true. And Trump was harder on Vladimir Putin than any previous president, I guess, since Reagan. He's the one that actually gave weapons to Ukraine, so, but, it's difficult. And I don't think there's ever going to be a solution to the question. When we say we should have a national conversation, 99.999% of the time, it means we're going to do absolutely nothing about it. This national conversation is a term that's come up in the last few years. At least I've only noticed it maybe the past 10 years. There's no such thing as a national conversation. We elect legislatures who create laws, and the Supreme Court makes determination on the constitutionality of those laws. So all this is not a national conversation. This is a conversation within the group. And the problem is, if with the current setup of the House and the Senate now, it may be different in the future, the opinions are going to go back and forth. And that's why I guess the Supreme Court's there, because what we think today, we may not think tomorrow. We just listed a few of the Supreme Court decisions that, were changed. So, yeah, Mac, I don't know. There's a lot of good questions and no good answers.
But Mike, don't we have to do something? When Charlie Kirk was murdered, didn't the young man who pulled the trigger that killed Charlie Kirk, was it his motivation, his belief that Charlie Kirk was somehow hurting or diminishing the rights of transgender individuals? Wasn't that individual living with a transgender, and weren't they a couple, a partner? And his belief was that Charlie Kirk was somehow transphobic and deserved to die?
Yeah, it's a good point, but the old saying goes back, you can't fix stupid. And I don't mean to say that in a flippant way. See, I've noticed a diminishment of critical thinking. We've talked about that before. The ability for people to reason through it. I consider myself blessed. I've posted on Facebook and other places that in 1981, I learned how propaganda works. Being in a propaganda unit, I was in Germany, and an old master sergeant asked me to sit down and listen to AFART's Armed Forces Radio and Television Service News. And they said, hang out. The Soviet Union, which was the Soviet Union back then, broadcast the news back to us. It was the same news using different adjectives, different descriptions. And then when I came home to America, I said, I'm going to start using that type of mentality, listening to our old news. And back then, Mac, it was still Walter Cronkite and
Yeah.
all those.
And that's the way it is.
And I started to notice that even in our news, it was a lot of adjectives, not as bad as today. Today, it's almost all opinion. It's rare to find actual just straight news. I looked it up. News Nation is maybe the best, and there's only 2 or 3 programs on News Nation that are considered to be actual news.
Hard news.
Fox News has basically 6 o'clock Brett Baer. That's the only super hard news. They ought to have a little chyron at the bottom, news and opinion. But then you get to social media influence and your friends, and people get into these echo chambers. So I don't know, Mac, maybe it's just time to start really holding the people that are brainwashed, because you can't stop people from saying things, but you can stop people from acting on what they believe to be true through discipline. You can't stop all people from shooting. But I think we need to make a bigger example. The trial on this Allan Cole guy, his lawyer said, well, we're not going to release him. He doesn't want bail. And everybody on the internet started saying, what? They were going to release him? No, there's a separate hearing for that. And he probably would have been turned down, 99.9% chance. But people started to have this idiot brush fire, thinking that because he refused bail, that they would have given him bail. That they didn't say that. So you have to listen carefully and not jump to conclusions about things. What did the person say? We were just on the back porch and I was reading a comment that somebody made to me on Facebook, and I replied, I never said that. People superimpose their own beliefs. But again, back to the accountability part. I think this guy, you can't execute this guy because nobody was killed, supposedly. We could possibly change the law to that. And people might think I'm nuts, but there's this thing called back the blue. And they wanted to see anybody who tried to kill a police officer, federal agent, or president have the possibility of the death penalty, even if it wasn't successful. The only reason nobody was killed is that Secret Service agent had a bulletproof vest on.
Yeah.
So just so you didn't kill the guy doesn't mean you didn't try. And I think you should face the same penalty. I think we should go back to public executions. At least
I agree with that.
let people see here's the consequences of your action. And then idiots that might believe something may not take it to the next level where they actually do something about their conspiratorial beliefs.
But here's the thing, Mike. 100 years ago, 150 years ago in this country, politically, we would say horrible, terrible things about political opponents. The problem is that they were written in the local newspaper. There wasn't any radio, there wasn't any television, there wasn't any internet. So they would write it and it would go in the newspaper. And, if it was the city of Boston, maybe half of the city of Boston, or New York, maybe half the city. But if it was Podunk, Iowa, 20 people read the opinion or the story. Today, when somebody makes these fantastical claims or these absurd comparisons or accusations, literally millions of people can see that. And I think the difference is that when somebody gets in their head, Donald Trump is a pedophile and a rapist, I'm justified in trying to end his life. That's because of this confirmation that occurs. If they thought that in their own head, but they didn't have, 100,000 people saying the same thing, they wouldn't get the courage, they wouldn't get the confirmation that, yeah, I should do that. That's the right thing to do. And I don't think today, with that information being so widely disseminated and repeated over and over and over again, even if it's an absolute falsehood, the big lie told often enough becomes the truth, to people who want to believe it, that confirmation bias. So I think, I don't know how we fix it, Mike. I just know that this latest example of this Allan Cole going after President Trump, you know, he lives in California. He was a teacher. He graduated from Caltech. He's not stupid. In other words, he has to have a certain level of IQ to be able to get into the university, let alone graduate. Now, he hopped on a train with a shotgun and a pistol and a couple of knives, rode the train all the way to Washington, D.C., checked into the hotel where he knew that the correspondence dinner was going to be later that week. And he stayed there a few days so that he would have the opportunity to try to kill Donald Trump. Because in his mind, Donald Trump was a rapist, a pedophile, and a traitor. And it was generally known knowledge, generally accepted knowledge. And therefore, Mr. Cole, myself, I'm in the right to take that man's life. And that's the part of this information envelope that we have to fix some way, Mike. There has to be some penalty for absolute falsehoods told with such force that weak-minded people, Now, I'm not going to hold the news organization, ABC, that said Donald Trump was a rapist, responsible for what Mr. Cole did. What I am going to say, though, is that ABC is part of the reason why Allan Cole did what he did. And I think that link is the one that we have to focus on, and we have to figure out some way, recognizing free speech exists. We don't want to limit free speech, but recognizing there's some responsibility in that whole envelope of information that should be treated with some level of responsibility. Do you agree or not?
Well, we have this thing where certain classes of people can't sue for libel and slander. I think, and Trump's argued against that, and I think he's right. I think we need to get rid of that. If you're a politician or a famous actor, actress, or it's basically somebody who's well known, and where that line is drawn, again, is one of those, well, we don't know. I think we need to get rid of that whole theory, because why should I be able to be held accountable for slander against you, but not against a politician
Or a
that
famous movie
or
star.
a famous movie
Yeah.
star, anyone. Number two, I just balk at the whole idea of stopping people from lying, because not every lie falls into slander and libel. But at the same time, I go back to the only real solution in my mind, Mac, is to hold people accountable. If you knew that if you allowed yourself to be brainwashed into believing certain things and took an action, that you would be met by devastating force, either life in prison, execution, even if it's only 10 years of your life. I think people would be reticent to allow themselves to be brainwashed. See, it's so easy to call yourself a victim of brainwashing.
Yeah.
No, it's on you. Look, you
Critical
don't need
thinking, critical
yeah,
evaluation.
and you don't need to be highly educated. I don't care if a person is illiterate. This fellow that was the Caltech grad is a prime example. You can be intelligent in some sense, but not use your God-given brain in another sense. And you have to be a willing participant
Yeah.
in that. He had to be a willing participant. If you believe lies and allow yourself to exist within the echo chamber to the point where you're willing to take action that is illegal, that's where the line must be drawn. And so instead of squashing free speech, we need to squash the action that is the result of people believing lies. It's up to you to know the truth.
But here's one, Mike. Adam Schiff, right? Adam Schiff sat on the whatever committee dealt with intelligence matters in Congress. And when the Russian collusion hoax was being perpetrated, Adam Schiff went in front of every camera he could find and said, Donald Trump is guilty of colluding with the Russians. I know that to be true. There's proof.
Mm-hmm.
Never was any proof ever given. Never was any proof ever shown to anyone. And the double-edged sword that's there, Mike, is that if an elected official like Adam Schiff, who sits on those committees where they have to, treat all the information they get in a secret manner, top secret manner, maybe, or not information you're allowed to reveal to people. When he says something like that, and nothing happens to him, and no ill will, and no one says Schiff is lying, then people believe it.
Plenty of people said Schiff was lying. Now, you may not have heard it if you live in that echo chamber I was talking about. But see, we talked on the back porch about this too. They are allowed to say whatever they want on the House floor or the Senate floor. Once you step in front of the microphones outside of your official capacity on the floor, he should have been held account for libel or slander. I forget which one's written and one's spoken.
Worse.
Words.
Well, libel is slam. Yeah, libel is when you write it.
We can look that up
Yeah,
later, but they're both things that you can be sued for, and I think people should be sued because we've not been using the law that is at our disposal. And number two, if you haven't heard the saying by the time you're 10 years old, that how do you know when a politician's lying, his mouth is moving. So you have to take everything a politician says with a grain of salt. I don't care if it's your team or the other guy's team. You have to be responsible for being able to sort the shit from the shinola.
But my point is, Mike, Adam Schiff was a Democrat. So if you're a Democrat living in Adam Schiff's district and he is your representative to Congress, and he says something with such surety, what he says, Donald Trump is guilty, you're probably going to believe that.
Yeah, but that's your fault. I'm back to it. And you've only brought, I'm getting a little bit excited this time because you've actually brought my thinking process through this to the point where I'm waiting for the argument against holding people accountable for their own stupidity. We used to have this, if you're that dumb, what do we call it? The Darwin Awards that we would give people in the military every year. If you're that dumb to believe everything you hear, I'm sorry, that's on you. You just can't be stupid. And if you say, well, not everybody's going to be as smart as you, Mike or Mac or whoever, that's not my problem. If you know there's going to be consequences for stupid action, then have all the stupid thoughts you want, say all the stupid things you want, but it's your actions that have to be kept in check. What's the old saying? The Supreme Court thing, your rights end at the other guy's nose or something like that.
Yeah, that was old English law. You're
Yeah.
right to swing your fist ends where it hits my nose.
Right.
My point, Michael, is again, when you see somebody who is in a prominent position, who you believe has some sense of either authority or some sense of believability because of the position they hold. If you see the guy that's sitting on the nightly news and he says, Donald Trump is a racist, Donald Trump is a rapist, Donald Trump is a pedophile, and nothing bad happens to that person with that platform, with that megaphone saying that, then you have a tendency to believe, well, it must be true because nothing's happened. Nobody contradicted it. And what I'm saying is that Adam Schiff, because of his level of prominence, because of his access to secret information that the Intelligence Committee would have, that other people would not have, when he said Donald Trump is guilty of colluding with the Russians, someone, somewhere, should have sat on him and said, that is simply not true, and we're calling you to account because that is not true. And that never happened.
Right. There should have been legal action taken. When it comes to the news, I think what happened to ABC should happen to more people. And that's why Trump wanted to get rid of that law protecting news agencies and others from
Well,
criticize,
that's the platform, that the internet companies all hide behind,
But
right?
I think,
I'm
that may
not
be
a
the
news organization,
solution.
I'm a platform.
So I think we came up with two solutions. Change the law on who can sue who, because that'll stop a lot of this crap. And the second one is more personal accountability. So we have a two-pronged approach, allowing people to be sued for their lies. And even that includes House and Senate members outside of the floor, because when you hear something on the floor of the House and Senate, you just assume it's all a pack of lies. Okay, so there's the Liars Club. Now you're outside the Liars Club. You don't have that immunity anymore. And then hold them accountable, lawsuits, civil suits, sue them till their pants fall off. I mean, look at what they did to Comey. They dragged him in, right? For 86-47 again. And somebody pointed out, and I think it's true, that whether he can be found guilty in a court of law isn't the point. We are going to do to him, and I hate to say we, because I'm a Republican and I'm upset with him, the same thing that he and his fellow Democrats did to our side, like Michael Flynn and others. You bankrupt them because now he's going to have to hire all these attorneys. And of course, his multi-millionaire friends make him come in and help him. But we're going to make him an example and pay a price. So there's a beginning.
But see, Mike, people should pay a price. And honestly, I believe that people who are elected to Congress, especially, I understand how freedom of the press is another one of those constitutional rights. And I understand why you must be extra careful when you start messing with the press. But I think there needs to be accountability on elected officials' part. When an elected official says something that is absolutely false, there ought to be some way of having that person removed from their elected position and forcing the community from which he comes to elect somebody who doesn't. And I think that should be true of all elected officials
I'm
at
with you.
every level of government. You simply can't make bold, false claims because the position that you're in lends credibility to your words that you might not ordinarily have. And I just believe that those things cause people, who knows why Allan Cole actually behaved in the way he did. But from his manifesto that we saw that he sent to his family, we know that he not only meant to kill Trump, but also members of Trump's cabinet because he felt that they were all behaving in a fashion that was detrimental to the United States of America. And that comes from people at every level of government criticizing this administration to the level of people believing that it is a illegal and inappropriate, unlawful organization. And I'm going to tell you something. If we do more of that, we will get more Allan Coles, and we want less of those, not more of them.
You think we beat this up enough?
I think we have, Mike.
All right.
Mac and Mike.
Out.